Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're on page 1296. 1296. The Rabbi Rashab explaining in Avodah the two aliyas and the two yuridis, which is existence was created by God in a certain state of consciousness. The purpose is to elevate it to higher states, from existence to experiencing deeper levels of the divine, of the transcendent. And in general, he's discussing two aliyas. This is all in context of Havai Yechatu Merivov, that in order to eliminate all opponents, even those that have a legitimate grievance or a legitimate cause for judgment, you elevate to a higher level. That's what Rosh Hashanah is about, to a level that's beyond the usual structure of Chesed and Gvura, and then even higher than that, all the way to before the Tzimtzum. So this is all indicated in the Gershayim that lies above the Havaya. The Havaya is read with two elevated tones, Gershayim, and also the two apostrophes that are facing upward also indicate on these two aliyahs. So generally it's an aliyah either from Havaya de Latato, which is Havaya of Zoh. Zoh is where the structure of Chesed and Gvura lies. As we learn that length, Zoh is the emotional structure both of Hishtalshlus and also of the human being. But we want to get beyond the wiring, the mutfa, and even the murgish. We want to get to a place where the emotions get beyond their own interest, but elevate to something transcendent, that their interest is the divine, is God. So it's the elevation of Zoh through Chachma and Bina, through Yichud Pnimi of Abba ve'Ima, of Chachma and Bina gazing and reaching to Arich Ampin and Atik Yomin, which is Primis HaKeser. And then elevation number 2 is all that Keser elevates all the way to before the Tzimtzum. These two elevations also exist before the Tzimtzum itself, as he explained, the elevation of the divine Elikus that is already associating itself, envisioning existence, and allocating. So Vovke, elevating to Yudke, that's all in the Shmoy, and both of them then elevating to the higher level of, that's higher than Shmoy, who? The Helam, the fundamental state of concealment that's higher than Gilui altogether. That reflects more Atzmus, as he's beyond Sevav and Mamala. So the elevation from Mamala to Sevav, and from Sevav to Etzem, is another way of phrasing it. In Aveda, these are the two levels of Kala. Kala comes from the word yearning, longing, reaching upward, Kaloyan. As a matter of fact, I looked up in the Maimorim that he quotes here, both Shir HaShirim, he quoted on page 1295. He quoted the Maimer, the first Maimer in Bukut Teira. I'm sorry, Senator Enna, and then before that the Maimer B'Chafei Kislev and Teira. And at the end of the paragraph that we learned on Friday on page 1296, the first Maimer Shir HaShirim, there he actually discusses more at length what the word Kala comes from. So essentially, there are two levels of Kala. One is the lower level, is that when you contemplate that your existence is completely nullified in the context of its source, because it's completely dependent on it, and when it's elevated in the source, it's on a completely different level. So you yearn along to be encompassed, to be absorbed in that. So that's Kalayan from being absorbed, but you are being absorbed. There he uses the expression actually, Yesh Misha Oyev, that there's an entity that is loving and revering and wants to be connected and completely absorbed in the source. That's the first aliyah, from Mamala to Sevav. And then there's a second aliyah, which is, there's not even an element of wanting to be absorbed. It's complete nullification when we understand that higher level of Atzmus, how everything compared to that, even Oyer, even the highest level of Oyer, and definitely the Oyer that comes from that Oyer, but Oyer is only a reflection. So there, it's a complete nullification in the presence of Atzmus, as he put it, as we learned on page 1296 on page 1296. So In the previous paragraph, he spoke about the difference between the nefesh habamis and the nefesh elikis, or the nefesh ativis, I should say, sichel ativi. In the Kutateri, he actually uses nefesh habamis as well as I think in Tere'er. In other words, the soul as it manifests inside of a body. Here he doesn't go into nefesh habamis, I believe. I don't think he mentioned animal soul. There he does. But he does talk about how the soul enters a body. So its way of experiencing God is through nature, is through the experience of existence. And from there, it extrapolates and comes to a point and recognizing that all that is nullified. And therefore, there's the kaloyan to want to be encompassed in it. But Sevav Kalalman is already the contemplation of the Nefesh Alekis, which is not bound to existence. It's not bound to the soul as inside of a body. Nefesh Alekis, there he says clearly that has the capacity to contemplate on the divine that is removed from existence. And that is there, then the bitl is one where you completely become one and you're completely bottled, I should say, nullified. Not that there's a will to elevate, because that indicates that there's an entity, but the entity now realizes instead of being focused on my own existence, it's much more superior to be absorbed and be encompassed in the higher reality of the divine. Here, we don't even talk about wanting. Here is just a complete nullification, which in a positive way means because you're sensing and experiencing atzmus and nothing else. I should add that in the Maimarim there, that in the Alter Rebbe's Maimarim, he does associate this. I think it's just interesting. The Rebbe Rashab didn't mention it yet, but I will mention it. He does associate with the two levels of Mesiras Nefesh that we find in Shema. It says at one level of Mesiras Nefesh that you're supposed to Meisha Nimsa Nafshi Be'echad, that when you say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, supposed to give your life. Echad has to have the kavanah, you're ready to give away your life. And then it says, B'chol nafshecha, afilu im notel nafshecha. Even if your life is taken, it's a second level of Mesiras Nefesh. And he explains the first one is the higher level, Yichudei Allah or Kali Allah. And the second level is Kala Tato, Yichudei Tato, the lower level, which comes after Baruch Shem, which is already recognizing there's an existence. Whereas in Shema, it's a higher level of unity. And that's how he explains the two levels of Bittul and Mesiras Nefesh. Now, that is all aliyas. What about Yerida? Remember, we want to draw that downwards. We're not just going up, we want to draw it down. Earlier, he said that's the whole kavanah, rotzei and shuv. Not just to aspire, not just to have a rotzei where you're yearning and longing to connect, but you want to bring down the godliness into existence, as he explained a number of times, also back a while back from Tanya in chapter 50, that the point is also to draw it back down, not just as a fire going up, but like water coming down, ava kamayim. So there too, there are also two steps. As he said on page 1298, he said, Kamoisha ola beis aliyas. And now you've elevated to these two, now you bring it down. First from atzmus to seviv, and then from seviv to mamala. First from the level that's higher into the level of chachma, of keser, of adam kadman, and then from there, from higher than atzilus into atzilus, all the way into zah. That zah, the way it began, that the zah, which is the structure of existence, is now permeated and imbued with these higher levels of divine consciousness. So what is that indicated into? That's the two levels of chassan. If kala comes from the word elevation or longing or reaching upward, kalois, kaloyin, and complete absorption or complete bittul, complete nullification, depending which level we're talking about, chassan, he explains in the Kutateri, comes from the word ches darga, which means lowering a lower level, lowering a level. Ches darga, it's missing a level, meaning it's coming downward. That's what he says. He's going to say that in the next paragraph, but he says it clearly in the Kutateri. So he says these are the two Yeridis, that's the two levels of chassan, which correspond to the two levels of kala. So if kala is like the makabel, the recipient, the zah, going upward, chassan is the mashpia coming downward. That once you go up, then you have the first level of chassan. That from atzmus eid ein sof. I'm reading the end of the paragraph that we learned on page 1296. Yumshach libchiyus b'chinas chakim. That the very concept of understanding and conceiving is the first Yerida, and the second, or Hamshacha, which is the Chachma, the Ak, and Chachma of Kesser in general. And the Hamshacha Beis, the second level of Chassan, is Himomayla Matzilus, Batzilus, V'hainu B'chinas Moichin Dezah, and all the way to Hamshacha Gam B'biyah. That's where we stopped at the end of this paragraph. So when you look at it this way, obviously this all follows, besides Havaya Yechatu Merivov, this also follows what was discussed before Havaya Yechatu Merivov, which was all about the idea not just of drawing down the energy into containers, but actually reaching to the highest level of the Helam that draws down and transform the container. Now, he hasn't gone yet to transformation, but I just wanted to make sure that we understand this is all flowing from earlier discussions of the levels that we elevate, not just Torah mitzvahs, but also neshamis, b'chol ma'adecha, and simcha shal mitzvah, and mesiras nefesh, and all the different levels he spoke about that are necessary to actually reach not just the level of shmai, but also the level of hu. So that's where the link comes, but it will be discussed more, but that's how it all links together. And that, if we're going to already make the connections, that followed the discussion of reward of mitzvah. The reward mitzvah being the schar mitzvah, mitzvah is the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, but today we have it more in the Mem Tzadik. And Lasalov, you'll be the full Yud Kei Vav Kei, but even higher than Havaya, as we're learning now, also the revelation of who. Okay. And if you want to know the flow from that, I might as well go back to that. So he goes back. If you're going backwards, I might as well connect it. That was also connected Kalim and Ur, Shima and Kav. And that explains why mitzvahs are such a powerful source, because it's Kalim, but it's rooted higher than the Ur. And that goes all the way back to the Simcha Shal Mitzvah. But before that was the Gan Eden. That what Gan Eden accomplishes is only the Giluyim, which are also necessary. But then Elam Haba reaches these higher levels of the Helam Eden Stima, which in turn followed the whole discussion of Gan Eden and Elam Haba, the whole flow of all the levels of Mutfa, Murgish, and Muskel. Yeah. Good, yeah. Ibr Yunikamechin. Yichud Abba B'Melon, Yichud Abba B'Metatoyin, and Biti, Achesi, and Imi. Okay, which is also all connected to this, but we'll see how it all comes together as the Rebbe Rashab continues. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take some questions. If not, we'll continue reading the new paragraph on page 1296. Okay. So on 1296, the last paragraph, and I want to correct something I've said a number of times. I just noticed, over Shabbos, these paragraphs were actually not created by the Rebbe Rashab. The publisher writes that they broke down the chapters in order to make it easier. In other words, the Rebbe Rashab wrote this all as one long flow. So a few times I mentioned and asked even why the Rebbe Rashab broke the paragraph this way, broke the paragraph that way. He didn't. So all those questions and all those comments I made on that are all moot, because these were based on basically humans who either were correct in breaking the paragraph correctly or didn't. So there's not much you could really be medayik. It does help because they did try to make some order, but I just wanted to point that out. So now the next paragraph on page 1296, and the pages can be found at on ayinbeis.com. So let me just preface and just remind us of something we learned before, because that he's going to bring it back. Now you may recall that back on page 1291, which we're talking about 5 pages back, the Rebbe Rashab, when he was explaining about the elevation to go higher than Zoh, Chesed and Gvura, where Gvura challenges, the judgments challenge the Chesed, the kindness, and legitimately so, B'nai Elikim. It could be they're too meticulous, but they do challenge, and they stand up to Avaya, which is Chesed and Rachamim. So therefore, we need to reach to a place that's higher, and that's Keser, that eliminates and actually cuts off all opponents, whether it's Gvuras, the Kedusha, the Gvura of holy, appropriate or holy Gvura, or the Gvuras Koshes, the sadistic and cruel forces. So you go to a level that's higher than Atzilus to Keser. To understand that, he brought what we say in Allah Nisim, and he brings the concept of Hashem Oimed Loriv Amim, the idea of standing, the difference between an upright position and a sitting position. That when the divine godliness, Elokus, manifests and he's sitting on the seat or the throne of judgment, so there is a sitting posture, which means the moichin, which are all the way up to the top, are lowered. It's moichin as it comes into the midas to do judgment, for judgment or for merit or for guilty or not guilty, as he explained on chapter on page 1291 and 1292. Whereas when he rises to go to battle, and then there's one I should also add, there's another level when he's learning on his own, which is moichin la'atzmai. But then when he rises to go to war, he can't be sitting in his throne. When the king rises to go to war, means he stands all the way upright. The mind is reaching upward to that which is even beyond regular intellect, what he called moichin pnimim. And the legs go all the way down, because when you're sitting, also the legs are lifted, especially if we're sitting with a footstool. Whereas when you go to war, you're standing upright, so you have the highest all the way going down to the lowest to vanquish the enemy and the opponent. And he said that physiological posture represents the spiritual state of Amida, which is why it says whenever you go to war, when it says Amadato Lahem and Emed Lariv Amim, because you're referring to that state. So he's now going to, and when you're standing, you also, not only are you going up to the highest level, you also bring it down all the way to the Raglaim, go all the way into Biyah. Whereas in judgment, they're not, Nihi is elevated to the level of Chagas, as he explained on page 1292. It's Nimshach L'Me'at B'Biyah. Okay. So it's from, yeah. So now he's going to ask a question based on that. So this is the question he's going to ask. I'll say it and then we'll read it inside. You're just telling me that we have two aliyahs, two levels of kala, that go all the way up to the etzem, the second level, first level going up to keser, and then from keser to the etzem, or mamala to seviv and seviv to the etzem. And then you say he brings it down both levels. But we know that when it brings it down, it doesn't stand, it's not exactly as it is above. When it comes down in a diminished form. So so he's going to say this. So however, we have to understand. On page 1292. In the inyan of that you stood up for them. You stood upright for them. The inyan amidah, what does amidah represent when someone's standing upright? That the way it's nimshach l'mayla, the way it's being drawn down from above, that's exactly how it comes down below. It's not subject to the regular gradations of ishtalshus. That was the whole point. We go up to the point that it essentially transcends the regular hierarchy and structure. U'be'inyan the base b'chinas chassan yedua, but the inyan of the two levels of chassan, it's known, and this is explained in the Shiur Hashirim that he just recited in a few lines before, in the end of the last paragraph. Shein beis min hamshachas. There are two different types of transmissions. V'hainu she'ein hagili ba'abiyah kamoi b'lamayla matzilus. That means the gili as it comes in tatzilus, bri, shir, and asiyah is not the way it is higher than atzilus. In other words, the idea of a chassan is it draws it down. It does not draw it down in this completely seamless fashion, like an upright from the top all the way down. It goes down, it's different. The Gilead, the high before Atzilus is on one level, and the next level of the Chasam brings it down into Atzilus. So how do we associate that? These two Yeridus and Hamshachas with the concept before that we said, going up, yes, we go up to those levels that are beyond it all. But when you draw it down, it seems that it's known that the two levels of chassan don't draw it down exactly equally. V'chein gam b'atzilus, matzilus lebiyah. And so too from atzilus to biyah, not just from higher than atzilus. Atzilus is there a difference, but there's also a difference from atzilus to biyah. Whereas before we said, no, we're getting, once you reach through the levels, whether it's b'chol ma'idecha or b'chol tkiyah shefer or tshuva, whatever the avodah is that reaches all the way up, the contemplation that reaches us all the way up to the highest levels. So based on what he said earlier, it seems that we're getting exactly that, and that's why it nullifies judgments. That's why yichatem merivav. That's why vayichatem merivav. But based on what we learn about the two levels of chassan draws it down in a way that there is a distinction from higher than atzilus to from first of all from the Gilead, from higher than atzilus into biyah, and from atzilus into biyah. There's also a difference. Shazeu Ayin Beis b'chinas chassan beis yiridus. That's the idea. That's the concept of the two levels of chassan. Referring to each level of chassan is a yerida. Two levels of chassan is beis yeridas, two descents. The chassan uloshen chayz darga kaneda. Here he brings this. This is that chassan comes from the word chayz darga. Chayz darga means a diminished level. He goes down a level. Now, when a chassan is going down a level from his initial state, so the whole concept is yerida, and yerida is not in a way seemingly the way it is above. That's why it's called a yerida, because you're going down. And here's two levels of two descents, which essentially dilute or diminish or conceal, however you explain it. But bottom line, it's not exactly one seamless flow, is the way we understand the two levels of chassan. The amshacha habeis, yerida legabe amshacha aleph. The second amshacha, meaning the second level of chassan, is a yerida, is a descent compared to the first amshacha. So if the first amshacha, let's say, brings from etzem into seviv kalam, and let's say the first one, when the second one is a yerida, it's not the same as it was in the first one. It's a second descent, and it's considered a descent from the first level, from the first descent, from the first amshacha. So that's a question on the table now. Everybody understand the question? Okay. So now he's going to answer that there's actually two levels in chassan itself. There's two ways to understand a chassan, which here in this case is drawing down this energy from these highest states of transcendence. So he says, omnom be'emes, however, be'emes, in truth, matzinu, we find the lepa'amim, at times, ksiv, kel mitzalis chassanim loshen rabim. We say this in Sheva Brachas, and we say it connected to marriage, to a wedding. Kel mitzalis chassanim. You don't say kel mitzalis chassan. You say the voice of the celebrations of chassanim, plural, loshen rabim. Beis b'chinas chayz darga. That's clearly indicating to two levels of a chassan, of two levels of diminishment, or two levels of descent, chayz darga. And sometimes it says it in the singular, upamim ksiv, and there are times that it says, not twice, not chassan in plural, v'hu kechassan yetzim mechupasei, and he's like a groom that yetzim mechupasei, comparing God to a groom that's leaving his chuppah, leaving the canopy. And here, loshen yachid, here it doesn't say chassanim, it says chassan loshen yachid, groom in the singular. So what is the difference? Why sometimes does the verse refer to chassanim in the plural, and sometimes chassan in the singular? So it says, elsewhere it's explained that the difference is, that this is the difference, these two expressions, plural and singular, bein zman shoye beis hamikdash, at the time when the beis hamikdash, when the holy temple stood, lizman ha-golus, to the time of exile, when the temple, after the temple was destroyed. That these two verses, or these two expressions, are indicating two different states of experience. one the time of the Beis Hamikdash, one the time of Golus. This man Beis Hamikdash kayam nemer kechosan loshen yachid. About the time of when the Beis Hamikdash stood, when the Holy Temple stood, there it says kechosan, that he's like a groom in the singular. V'hainu, and why? Because that means shashefa nimshich ma'atzmus hamaitzel el reishis hanitzalim, because the flow that is being transmitted or drawn or being expressed from atzmus hamaitzel, from the core emanator, the source, el reishis hanitzalim, to the beginning or the top or the head of the emanations, which usually refers to keser, chachma, bina, but kesef. In other words, the first, that hamshacha, hine b'china zu hayanimshel gam ke lamate b'moker dibiyah. So in the time of Beis Hamikdash, there was a seamless flow from the highest level of atzmus hamaitzel, like he says, to Reish HaNitzon, also, as it was, this very level transmitted all the way below, b'moker dibiyah, to the source, also Bri Yitzir Asiyah. And that's why we had a temple on earth, because it was drawing down this divine level, this higher level of Elokus. And this indicates this was the dwelling of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence in the Holy of Holies. As we know, the Holy of Holies was literally the holiest place on earth, and in it was Wada Hamshacha from this Atzmus HaMaitzel. That was the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the channel was severed, or at least concealed. Ubizman Golus. But in Zman Golus, once the Shekhinah no longer had this place to reside in the physical world, and it says the Shekhinah nistalik, similar to what it says after the Chet Tzadas, that the Shekhinah so-called got concealed. Bizman Golus tzorich is Beis Hamshachas. Now you need two Hamshachas, because you don't have the seamless flow. You know, but Yaakov Avinu said when he woke up and he realized he was resting on the Har HaBayis on the Temple Mount, he said, Zeh Shar HaShamayim. This is the gate to heaven. That means the physical Temple Mount, where the Beis Hamikdash would be built, is a gate to heaven. So that gate is a seamless flow from the highest levels downward. That's Man Beis Hamikdash. But Bizman HaGolus, you need two Hamshachas. First step is you need to draw from the Atzmus HaMaitzel, the core of the emanator, into the Reishis HaNetzolim, the beginning, the top of the emanations. And that doesn't just flow seamlessly. Next page 1297. So it has to be in two stages. And then there comes the second Hamshacha, which brings it down from Reishis HaNetzolim, from the top emanations into Biyah, into being a source for the Eir, for the light and revelation that is going to be drawn and extend into Biyah. So it's not just one like flow, it's one step and second step. So based on that, that's the difference. What does it say when Chassan singular, time of the Beis Hamikdash? It's one Chassan, it's one Hamshacha, one Yurida, going from the highest all the way to the lowest, like when we stand upright. In the time of Golus, you have two stages. The first step happens, but then it remains to some level, it remains there. And to get to the next step, you need another stage. And that's what distinguishes, that's why Chassanim twice, to indicate these two Hamshachas, these two stages. Okay. I'll stop again if anybody wants any clarification. He hasn't finished the topic yet, but that's the initial. He didn't yet fully answer and apply it to our discussion, but he gave the understanding why Chassan singular and plural, the difference. And now he says, top line on page 1297. And according to what was explained here, Yesh Lemer, we can say, Al Pi Mashin is Bar Le'il. According to what we learned earlier. And here he's now referring to page 1276. So going now 20 pages back. So he's going to explain based on this. So according to what we learned earlier, what did we learn? The gamba amshachas hapnimius, shaydei mitzvahs. So we learned back there that there's a difference. Why mitzvah is called mem tzadik vav hey? Why is it not yud ke vav ke? Even though mitzvah, the mem tzadik is replacing, is a chiluf. It's an exchange of the letters yud and hey. Mem in the ad bash exchange of letters. So the mem represents the yud, and the tzadik represents the hey, the first yud hey. Why? He said because now in Zman HaGolus, not Lasid Love, the way we get the Hamshach of Yud Kei is through the levush, the garment of Mem Tzadik. It's somewhat concealed. The primary gili is Vav Kei. And even the Yud Kei comes through a Mem Tzadik. That was discussed back on page 1276. You can go back there if you want to refresh your memory on that topic, 1276. So now he says, based on that, the Gamba Hamshacha Pnimish Al Dei Mitzvahs, that even the Hamshacha Primis, which is the Yud Kei of mitzvah, not just the Vav Kei, which is the Hamshacha Chitzenius, as the mitzvah comes down into physical objects, as he explained there. But even the Yud Kei in the mitzvah, Harimashamer Begili Achshav, what radiates in a revealed way now, meaning in our time, not before Mashiach come, before Lasid Lave, Hurak Bechinis Ha'esis the Vav Kei. So even the Pnimius through the mitzvah, it also radiates through the letters of Vav Kei. But Yud-Kei ba b'chilufa eisius mem tzadik. But the Yud-Kei comes through the exchange of the letters mem tzadik. In other words, it's coming through a garment. The hainu shemis alim ha'oyer. That means that the oyer of Yud-Kei is being concealed. The einamer begili mamish. And doesn't radiate mamish begili, and that's why we see in this world, even when we do a mitzvah, we primarily see its effect in the Gashmis. You don't see the deeper divine force of Yud-Kei in any physical sense. However, he qualifies. If you remember, that was regular, most mitzvahs. However, there were the few mitzvahs that we talked about, that the rak mitzvahs protius yesha adam echel peresen be'el mazeh canal. On page 1290, on page 1279, a few pages later, he explained and qualified there are specific mitzvahs that a person eats from their fruits in this world, and explain because those mitzvahs do bring down the gili from Yud Kei. And the mitzvahs he spoke about, if you recall, was from the Mishnah and Peah. And he said that the mitzvahs that it does bring it down was and he went through each mitzvah. What were the mitzvahs? It was first one was Gemilas Chasadim was the second one. Kibud Av'aim, Gemilas Chasadim. Kibbud Avayim, Gemilas Chasadim, and then Talmud Torah connected Kulam, but there was one more, I think. What are the four? Oh, yeah, from the Hava Shalom ben Adam lechavere, and then Talmud Torah. So he explained those mitzvahs have a particularly unique feature, but generally the mitzvahs is Vav Kei, and the Yud Kei comes into a form of Mem Tzadik. So based on that, he's now going to connect that with what we just learned about Chassan and Chassanim, the plural and the singular. But he didn't finish it. He's going to continue. And even though we learned that when you do a mitzvah, you're drawing down atzmus ha'oyer, nevertheless, it comes in a state of concealment. Now, V'im Kain, so based on that, in the transmission of nowadays, of now, in the present, meaning Zman HaGolus, yesh chiluke madreges. There are distinct levels. They're distinguished. There are levels that are distinct from one another. They're separate levels. And it's not similar. The transmission of the divine in higher than Atzilus, and in Atzilus and Biyah. There are three different levels of divine revelation. Like we explained earlier, discussed earlier, there's the Torah of Atzilus and there's Torah of Bria. If you want to know what that is, that's on page 1272. Spoke about that. So he's bringing together what we learned earlier. So we see from this that there are levels in the transmission. It's not one seamless flow. V'zeu chasanim loshen rabim, and that's chasanim loshen rabim in the plural, referring to different levels. Generally two, but it could also refer to more than two. But generally two levels. So he brought together the explanation why it says plural about Zman HaGolus to what we learned earlier about mitzvahs, that there is a distinction because even though we're drawing from the highest levels, but it comes in a concealed way as we get lower down. Avala osid, but in the future, when it will be no longer, your teacher will no longer be covered with a garment. Yikonef is a garment, like a shirt. And like he brought earlier before as well, when he spoke about this on page 1270, let's see a second. He brought, that is today. But la'asad lave, he brought the lo yikonef eid merecha. Oh, on page 1276. Yeah. He brought the asad lave, the garment will be removed, the mem tzadik will be removed, and the yud k will be shining in an undiluted fashion. Shelo yibchinis levushim klal. There'll be no garments at all. Ubchinis yud k yeir v'yizgala b'bchinis gilei mamish. And yud k will radiate and be revealed in a gilei mamish, completely in a completely revealed level, not through the garment of mem tzadik. So yeh oz chassan lashon yachid. So then it'll be chassan lashon yachid in the singular. Shetiyam shoche echad mamish. Be one flow, and therefore one level of chassan, one flow from the highest all the way down below to the lowest. Okay. Again, I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything, because there's a lot of, as you see here, he's tying together the puzzle on many different levels, bringing back things we learned earlier, connecting it to here. He's going to do a little more of that now. So this can be, if you're not really sharp in your memory of everything we learned, this can be a little overwhelming. But remember, all of this was discussed at length, not briefly earlier. I'm just connecting it and showing you what pages. So I would definitely recommend looking back at those pages if you really want to understand what it says here. And because I'm sure some questions are going to be, what did it say there? So I suggest you look there. I'm happy to give you a quick summary of it, but to really appreciate it, I would look more closely at all those pages. But before I go to the next connection, he's going to make another connection now with what we've learned as he's tying everything together here. Any questions?
Yes, I have two questions. One is that even the times the base of Mikdash standing, the Rabbi says here there was one hamshacha, chassan singular, but you would, and it says yud k coming down rather than through mitzvah would be the giloy of the panemius yud k rather than mem tzadik. But even then, you would think that there has to be at least two, because from who helam atzmi to the name, even to yud k, even if the yud k is going to come down in panemius as yud k down to olam asiyah gashmi, you would think it has to go from a helam atzmi to the name to yud k vav k. That has to be one itself, and then there's another hamshach all the way down into a siyah. You would think there minimal would have to be two anyways. How? No,
that's not what he's saying here. He's saying in the Kodesh Kadoshim, you had. Why don't you ask a better question? If the Asad Love will be this Gilui, why do we say in the Beis HaMikdash? The Beis HaMikdash is not the future. Will the Asad Love be exactly like in the Beis HaMikdash? Mm-hmm. So I'll answer a question with a question, okay? Here he suddenly said the Beis HaMikdash, you have Chassan, Lashon Yachid, and then he says, the Asad Love that will be. And the Asad Love, Lo Yikon Afeid Merecha, is a very strong statement. The answer, of course, is that everything is relative. The explanation given about Chassan and Chassanim, singular and plural, is that he said b'mokem acher, is in general the difference is Beis HaMikdash compared to Golus is a seamless flow, and that's why you had a holy of holies on earth. Mokem ha'aron eina min hamida, that when you walked in there, the aron manifested literally nimna ham nimnois, a total paradox, space and no space all in one. That is a very unique experience. That means that from the highest levels, he doesn't use the word helam atzmi here, but based on what we learned, he definitely uses atzmus hamaitzil, all the way into Biyah in the Beis Hamikdash, and specifically in the Kodesh Kadosh. In Golus, you don't have that. In Golus, everything is dressed up in garments. You don't have such Gili Elikus. This is explained everywhere where you talk about the difference between the Gili Elikus and Beis Hamikdash and Golus. So they're relative to one another. One is Chassan Yachid, singular, one flow, and the second is Golus, is two, all relative. Now, La'asad Lave, we know not only will be higher levels, but also be permanent, and it'll also be in the whole world, not only in the Beis Hamikdash. So bottom line is, of course, the Asad Love is going to be even higher than the Beis Hamikdash. There will be truly a seamless flow. He doesn't go now into this distinction here, but it's obvious when you learn Chassidus and you understand the different levels. So compared to Golus, it would be called Chassan Lashon Yachid. If you start really dissecting it, can you find levels there? I'm sure you can find levels. But remember, the Kodesh Kodashim was very much a Gili Alakus from Atzmus, because only Atzmus is higher than space and space all in one. He doesn't mention Makamar Neinaminda, but he uses Holy of Holies. So that right there is something that is like a taste of these highest levels all the way below. So generally, that would be considered the one flow. That's the general explanation for it. And again, it's not black and white, because if you start dissecting it, what about the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash? Was there a difference? And we know in the second Beis Hamikdash, the Aron wasn't there. So of course, when you start breaking it down, you'll find levels. But compared to Golus, that's the Zman Beis Hamikdash. Compared to Golus, is this different? This general difference.
Now, how do you explain that?
Will be higher on the Beis Hamikdash?
What you tell me? The Bayis Shlishi will be higher than Bayis Shlishi and Bayis Sheni.
Of course.
Never heard this before. Of course. After all this Aveda, the Dira B'Tachtena will be complete. Will be Migdash Adnei Keni Yadecha. Bayis Shlishi is one Madrega. Bayis Sheni is another Madrega. Bayis Shlishi is a whole nother level. Anyway, it's not just Bayis Shlishi. The whole world will be v'nigla kvei davai v'leik oit b'kanaf leid menach. Yes, la'asid love will be the highest level, even higher than koydem chetei tzadas. So that's the short answer to that. Yeah.
My question, though, Rabbi, maybe I heard your explanation, but my question was: it seems to me that the revelation of Yud Kei Vav Kei has different revelations now because of Golus, based on not exist, based mixtures. That we could have panemius of the shmoy, that level. Listen, all the way.
You didn't. I just want to go from my answer. You didn't. I did. Answer. It's all relative. It's all relative.
Okay. But the question it doesn't seem like a relative question about from who.
Helam Atzmi doesn't speak about who and shmoy here. Let's use the language he is speaking. So let's use the language he is speaking. He's saying Atzmus Hamaitzil all the way down to Biyah. Is that's the language he was using? Does that help you?
My question to you would be that level of Etzem Amaitzel, is that in Yud Kei Shmo or in who?
First of all, it's not even relevant. Let's say it's who all the way down into this physical world, and that's why you have space and higher than space all in one, which is higher than Sevav Mamala, as explained in many places in Chassidus. Let's start with that. I have no problem saying it's who coming all the way into Biyah, one seamless flow, Chassan, and that's that radiated in the Kodesh Kadosh.
Because my understanding was who was even higher than that kind of level, a total concealment. But okay, that's
what do you mean? In La'asad Lavi, it says there'll be the revelation of who, correct?
Yes.
So in Beis Hamikdash is a similar idea.
I missed you before for a second.
Even in Tanya, he says that by Matan Teda was me'ein zeh, kvar hoya leilom b'matan Teda. Me'ein what? L'asad lave.
Simon, I missed you before when you answered me. I'm sorry. Is in Beis Hamikdash now, by Slisha, it's less than it will happen in Gilui L'asad lave? I know you answered, but I lost you.
1 second.
Rabbi Taktali, he answered that, is this base of Mikdash Shlisi going to be higher than the base of Mikdash Rishon and Sheni? So of course it's going to be a greater revelation. That's what he said. You'll see. I mean, he's going to answer you again.
Okay.
That's what he answered. And
Okay,
the Giloy of Beis Hamikdash, or the Giloy of that level, was only in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, where he said that in the times of the Geula, it's going to be all over the world, that Gil level.
Yeah.
So it's going to be much.
That I understand. But in Beis Hamikdash itself will also be higher.
I would assume so, because he says that the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi is definitely higher and greater. It has eternity to it and has a higher level than any of the first two. But he'll answer you, I guess. That's what he said when you were your answer.
And now that you say that who is going down now until Lamata Mato, so that means it's going to be even. We don't know what who is, because he didn't answer that last time we asked if who is Atmos, or let's say level lower than Atmos, the Helam Atzmi.
Well, I asked him that, and he said that Etzem Amaitzel, I asked him if that's a level of Shmoi, even at the highest Panemius level, as Etzem or who, and he said it really.
Who. But I'm asking you, is who lower than Atmos, or who is Atmos?
No, he said that before. Who is not Atzmitz itself? There's Atahu Levadecha, Atahu Shmo, who. It's a third level. It's Atzmitz itself is higher than who.
But in Beis Hamikdash, Atmos itself in Beis Hamikdash.
So
that's
that question I didn't ask. We don't ask him, but clearly, what we call Atzmus is higher than who.
Okay.
Because it's Atu Hu Levadecha, Atu Hu Avaya Levadecha. Those are four levels.
I'm going to get in a prison in a minute.
Okay, I think some things are need a little more clarity. Yeah, I hear what you said. Thank you. That was helpful. But some things, like I said, I think need more clarity.
Okay, I'm back. You want to ask anything?
No, we spoke about while you wasn't here.
I heard what you said. You've asked at least 6 times whether who is Atzmus, and I told you no.
I know, it's not. So
Answer is not. Atzmus is Atzmus. Who is Helem Atzmi, or Helem, or Yechelis, and so on. So it's clearly not. Who is, okay.
So Atzmus was in Isgal in Beis Hamikdash Rishon? Will it be in Isgal?
I don't know. The Rebbe Rashab is not saying anything. I'm not going to speculate.
Okay.
I have patience. Well, as we learn it, we'll see how he develops. Right now, he's speaking about 2 Hamshachas, one from Atzmus Hamaitzel. Let's use the language to Reisha Sanatzolim, and from Reisha Sanatzolim into Atzilus and Bia, and Reisha Sanatzolim into all the way to Makar of Bia. Earlier, the language he used was from Seviv Kalam into Mamala, and from Etzem into Seviv. Generally speaking, it sounds like it's from Hu to Shmoi, and in Shmoi itself, either from Yudke to Vovke, or from Etzem to Keser, and Keser into Atzilus, into Zah. Moichin of Zah, Moichin of Keser, all the way to that which is higher than Moichin in Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's the levels here. So, who is quite a nice high level, by the way, and so is Shmoi. So for me, even if Shmoi is Nizgal, it's also good. Here he's saying that in Zman Golus, there's more concealment than Zman Beis. This is not new in this Ayin Beis. This says in many places. Zman Beis was Gilead Lekuz Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi. We don't have Gilead Lekuz Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi now. So Beis Hamikdash is a Gilead Lekuz down below. He's comparing, and that's why he says it's like Chassan Lashon Yachid. Chassanim Lashon Rabim is Golus. So based on that, and based on what we learned earlier, he says that mitzvahs today, there's gradations. Mem Tzadik, Yudke, Vovke. So that fits the Chassanim plural. And La'asad Lave, well, there'll be a seamless flow, no garments at all. It'll be Chassan Lashon Yachid. That's what he has said. Now, if you want to come, I explained that La'asad Lave and Beis Hamikdash is distinct. He's not making a distinction here, But if you want, it's clearly there are different levels, but everything is relative to Golus, Chassan, and Chassanim. Are there more questions? I'm happy to answer, so please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
The biggest question you should be asking, by the way, how could there be a Helam Atzmi come revealed? What does that even mean? If it's completely beyond revelation, how is that revealed? So, by the way, I explained and elaborated on that quite at length in previous classes, what that means. And that will be lost. He has talked about it. He's talked about it relatively pretty at length. Well, he explained it. So we will learn about it more, because ultimately that's going to be Einoid. If you remember the Shiur Shakelim, not just the air that transmits through the containers, that the containers themselves will reveal the power of the divine in them. You remember this discussion? It's not just the Gili of earth through Kalim, but that the Kalim themselves, the Helam itself, the night itself will shine. The Tzimtzum itself will reveal the divine. That's ultimately going to be lost of love. Are there times in history that we had a taste of it? Yeah, listen, he said even if you remember, if you go back, if you really want the plot thicken, and that's why I think it's important that you go back to learn. If you remember, when he spoke before he went to the mitzvahs, that Eichel Peresein Be'elam Hazeh, look back, go back to this page. On page 1278 and 1279, he speaks about neshamas that had a similar experience in this world, like La'asad Lave. You remember that? He spoke about, look at the bottom of page 1278. He says, La'asad is Golus er einish is Golus b'chinas aprimis b'chinas yudkei sheba mitzvahs v'gia gili gam b'chinas vavkei li hefresh ben ruchnius v'gashmius. You see this? You guys looking there?
In which page is that?
So I'm just trying to refresh your memory that this was discussed relatively at length. So he says no difference between Ruchnius and Gashmis. You know what kind of level that is? And not only that, Adarabah. He says, Ikra Gili Yirba Gashmi Atzme.
Yeah, which page?
Okay.
And
then he says,
I miss you again. Which page?
Ikra Gili Yirba Gashmi Atzme. Where he said, where the body will actually nourish the soul. So that's why I'm saying to you, if you really want to understand this, you got to go back to learn what we learned there. And then he said,
which page is this?
Can someone tell him? And then he goes on and says, and similar to this was Adam Adishon before the sin. And he goes on to speak about Eliyahu Hanavi and Chanech and other great tzaddikim, Neshamas Gavoyas. He actually even brings, if you remember, he brings, I call the Baal Shem Tov, the others. Anyway, he brings people who actually experience this in this physical world, a taste of it. So you see that this type of revelation, obviously in the future will be the full-blown version of it, but there are elements of it that we can experience now. And there he clearly spoke about the Gili of who? The Gili of the Helam that comes all the way down. However, L'Asad Love will be in the full sense of the word, whereas now we have in general levels, speaks about the two levels of Chassan. Okay?
He's saying, Sheirish Kulono Yosef Atzadik, Shoyo Ish Matzliach Gam Begashmius, Hashem Imoy Mamish.
Listen, I just told you what pages to read. Feel free to read it any time, and I think it'll help understand this. Okay. Are there any other questions on this topic? You want me to elaborate more or not? I just want to repeat to you, I personally have probably read this last 80 pages 20 times at least. So that's the only way you can really begin to understand it. You can't read it once and just assume you get it, because it's all very intricately interwoven. Everything builds to the next level and so on. So I highly recommend, if you really want to understand it well, you're going to have to go back and read it slowly. You'll see how each piece feeds to the other piece. A lot of what I'm saying here is informed by what I learned earlier and what we learned earlier and reviewing it. And even now, looking back, I always see new nuances. So I'm just telling you, that's really the way to really get a picture, a clearer picture. And the truth is, the whole Ayin Beis is about interface between God and existence. So you could imagine that throughout history, every generation and every tzaddik and every individual had their own level of interface. So there's a lot of levels that we can talk about. And then there's the general picture to just give us the general map of how it works. And that's what he's doing right here in the context of one chassan lashon yachid, singular or plural. Okay? I don't want to continue unless there's something, if anybody wants to ask anything. Good? Okay. Now, v'yesh lahasim zeh. So Rebbe Shah is going to tie some more things together here. We can also reconcile this. We could also, lahasim is more than reconcile, also to align it. Imam Avur b'makom acher, with that which is explained elsewhere, shezeu hefresh ben zman habayis l'zman hagolus, canal. That there's the difference between the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood and zman hagolus, the time of exile, as mentioned before. The Hinen is boily ill. He's going to now explain this in more detail, because it was explained earlier. Okay, now here then I have to refer you back. You recall on page, let's go back. We're going now back 50 pages. He's taking us back 50 pages now. You may recall, and we mentioned many times, I'm going back to page 1240, Aleph Reish Mem. It really began on page 1237. So if you recall there, he spoke about two types of yichud of Abba ve'ima. Chachma and Bina. A yichud chitzeni, a more external or superficial union, and a yichud pnimi, a more internal and intimate union. And he said that when Chachma and Bina have a yichud pnimi, that's when they draw down from atzmus. He brought it here as well several times from the Maimer, the Bir, and V'nigdashti and L'kut Teira from the Alter Rebbe. And the language from Kabbalah that he used on page 1237, he says that's when Chachma and Bina Amistaklim, they gaze at Mitzcha da Arich Ampim, at the forehead of Arich Ampin, and they receive from there Shin Ayin Noherin, the 370 lights of Atik. And through that, they actually sweeten and nullify the Gvuris. Reminds you of something? You see the connection to Havai Yechat Meriv. Because that was also Tam Tokas HaGvuris, to eliminate and to sweeten the judgments. But then he spoke about, so the gazing is where? At the forehead of Metzach of Arich Ampin, which is referred to as the level of Ratzon. Because Ratzon is like the forehead, it doesn't have any gilui. The forehead doesn't have a gilui, it actually covers up what's inside it. And he discussed what Ratzon was at length. Then on page 1240 and 1241, if you look there, he speaks about not just the forehead, there's also the gilui of the cheeks, trei tapuchin. That there's also, looking at the face, you can look at the cheeks and not just at the forehead. And he explained that looking at the cheeks, what he says, what the word expression there was, I'm reading now on page 1241. Mistakim b'chinas panim da'arich. So he says the trein tapuchin is a place where there are no panim mesitis. There's no hair on the cheeks. So he says that's a lower level than the forehead. Now, there's a long footnote, there's a long Hagah that we did not learn that the Rebbe Rashab wrote in explaining these two levels. And it's actually printed later. If you have volume 3, it's printed at the end of the Hemshech on page 1478 and 79, 1478, 79. I didn't learn it yet. We didn't learn it together because whatever reason at the time was very dense. It's a pretty long Hagah. I mean, it's a page and a half or 2 pages. But here it is relevant to discuss that there's 2 revelations when we look up, when Abba ve'Ima is gazing at Arich, you can get something from the Metzach, which is a higher revelation, or from the Trei Tapuchin, which is a lower revelation. But both are from Arich. They're both the face of Arich. Question is, what part of the face? Now, remember, we talked about the face before, Zohar Ampin and Arich Ampin. We talked about 2 faces, the long face, the small face. And this is why it's so relevant here, because we're elevating from Zohar to Arich and from Arich to higher levels. So this is how the Rebbe Rashab now is going to explain this connection here. So he says, Dihine, Dihine Nizbar Le'il, as we explained earlier, where I just referred to page 1240 and 1241, and more at length in the Hagah that I just referred to on page 1478. He says like this. The Baha'aras Panim Yesh Beis Madregas. When a face is the shine, the glow, Baha'aras Panim of a face, there's 2 levels. In general, we say Chachmas Adam Teir Panav. The wisdom of a person shines in their face, like an aura, a glow. So he says there are 2 levels. B'chinas Ha'aras Panim, the B'chinas Mitzcha, the Atika, the glow of the face of the level of the forehead of Atik. And the second is the glow, the shine on the face in the 2 cheeks, the trein tapuchin. Va'amitis inyan zivuga shlim. We learn there that the true zivug shlim, when there's a total union between father and mother, chachma and bina, hu bistaklusam b'bchinas metzach. It's when they gaze at the Metzach of Atik, which there he explained is also connected to the Metzach of Arich. That's the highest level. When they gaze there, they become completely fused as one with a total union that is not how Chachma and Bina are in Atzilus on their own. Chachma and Bina and Atzilus are 2 spheres. You have father and a mother. And they could join together, for example, to take care of their children. But that's when Chachma and Bina goes down into Zah, like we learned. That's when Moichin is involved in the matters of Chesed and Gvura, of merit, Zchus and Chayv, which is like someone sitting in judgment. That's Moichin and Midas. But when Chachma and Bina are on their own, so that's a higher level. They're still on their own. But then even higher is when they join together and become like one as they gaze at Atik, at the Metzach of Atik. So he says that is the ultimate Zivug Shlim, which creates. That has the power to create a new soul. That's what he explained there, new energy, because you're going all the way to levels that are higher than regular Giluim. You're going to the Helam. Here it's still in Keser, and then there's a higher level, how it is before the Tzimtzum, but relatively speaking, you're dealing with places that are higher than the regular Giluim. So he says, and then you have Amshach from Chachma of Abba, the Chachma of Abba, meaning that you're getting not just from Bina, you're getting the Chachma of Abba, which is Chachma of Chachma, which is the purest form of Chachma as it connects to and senses a reality greater than itself. Koyach Ma'as, Chachma is gazing at Keser. V'zeh nifsek b'zman Golus. And this ceased to be, this paused, or this stopped, when after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. This level of Gilui. So the yichud pnimi of Chacham and Bina, Zivuga Shlim, gazing all the way at Atik, at the Metzach of Atik, and drawing it down, that stopped Bezman HaGolus, in time of exile. And the gili that comes from the two cheeks, which is also a gili, that is not a zivugisha, that's loishlim, that's not complete. Be'erech madregas anal, in relative, commensurate to the level that we just spoke about, the higher level of the forehead. And this revelation from the cheeks can be also in Zman HaGolus. So we could also have revelation, but not like it is Metzach Da'atik in Zman HaBayis, time of the Beis HaMikdash. When do we have it in Zman HaGolus? So he explains in the parentheses. Bizmanim de'es rotzen, in times, in auspicious times. Like many times we speak about a tainus, a fast day. It's called an eis rotzen. The Rebbe would talk about it very many times when he spoke, whenever he spoke on a fast day, eis rotzen. Generally Shabbos, Yom Tov, times that are called the eis rotzen, a particularly auspicious time where God opens up new channels or channels that are not usually open. Okay, well, let me pause. So Bezman the Eis Ratzon. So even as Zman HaGolus, we can have a revelation from this place of Trein Tapuchin, the lower level. And now he says something else. And from this level comes Nimshachim Neshama Shayiklulim Ba'adam Arishin. From this come the souls that were encompassed in Adam Arishin. Rak Sha'oid Le Nimshachum Elam Shenikrayim Rigam Kein Neshamas Chadoshes. So let me explain what he's saying here. There are three types of souls explained in Kabbalah. You're probably familiar with neshamas that were here already. That's called a Gilgul. They reincarnate. They're neshamas chadoshes la'asad, completely new souls that never existed at all. But there's a third level, a middle level. Neshamas that were encompassed. Adam Arishan, remember, is Koil Kol HaNeshamas. Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya Geras HaKodesh. He's like the all-encompassing, he's the central soul that encompasses all souls, even souls that never came to earth. Is that a new soul or is not a new soul? On one hand, it's new because no one ever had that soul in this earth. It's not a reincarnation. But on the other hand, it's not new because it was encompassed already in Adam Arishan. La'asad Lave will be souls that weren't even encompassed in Adam Arishan. So there's three levels. The question about the Alter Rebbe is not clear which level he comes from. Most likely it seems that it comes from Adam Arishan, but he never came down yet. That's why he's a new soul. And then there's Neshamas Chadoshes will be lost, completely new, will be new Hamshachas that were never, not even in Adam Arishan. So the Rebbe Rashab is saying, an interesting statement, that the Neshamas that were encompassed in Adam Arishan, which that never, the Oilei Nimshachul La'elam means they weren't drawn down, they didn't come down to this world yet. They're also called new souls because they were never here in this world, but they were encompassed in other medicine. And he associates as that, not with Metzach Da'atik, but with the Treim Tapuchin, interestingly. Why? Because it's not a level of Lasad love. It's not a level of a higher level. It's a level that's in other medicine. However, it didn't come down yet. That's what it sounds like he's saying, even though it's very brief and it's hard to be conclusive. But that's what he sounds, because he's putting it all after Yochali Gam Bezman HaGolus. So also in Zman HaGolus, you could have a Neshama Chadosha. The Alter Rebbe is a Neshama Chadosha, for example. Not L'Asad Love, and not Zman HaBayis. Where's that coming from? So he says that's coming from the souls encompassed in Od Medicine, the level of Trein Tapuchin, not the level of Metzach Havatik. I'm going to go slow here, and I'll stop for questions because this is a little dense, but it is referring to ideas that we spoke about, as I said, going back. We're talking about 50 pages ago. So I will stop again if anybody wants to clarify anything.
Trein Tapuchin, could you just remind us, refresh? It's lower. We know that it's lower than Atiko. Metzach.
It's the cheeks. Metzach is here. The cheeks are here. Okay. So just as in physical, it's a lower level. The same thing in the ponim of Atik and Arich. Metzach is a higher level. It's like Keser Shebekeser or Primis HaKeser. And Tapuchin is more like in the face itself, a lower level. You could say it's maybe Zah Shebemechin, if you wish. Doesn't say exactly. You have to go back on page 1241. What did he say? Trei tapuchin? It says, yeah. It's more connected more to hamshacha that is more lower and revealed, where metzach is more of an atzmi.
Yeah, metzach is atik and tapuchin, trei tapuchin is arich.
Where does that say that?
I'm asking you.
It doesn't say that. No. It could be an atik itself. There's levels too. There's pnimius atik, there's kesed the atik, there's radla, there's moichin the atik, there's midas the atik. So in atik itself, there are also levels, as well as arich. There, back there, he explained atik and arich somewhat exchangeable. Metzach of atik and metzach of arich, I discussed it there at length, because he used both of them interchangeably at times. Like in the Zohar, it says, I believe, metzach of, let me see. Anyway, I would refer you to go back there, read it slowly, and you get a better picture. There he says, mitzcha de arich ampin, and it's mekabel from, then he says, mitzcha de izgala ba'atik ikdisha rotznikra. Yeah. Bottom line is that if the 10 faculties, Chochmah through Malchus, is our conscious faculties, the superconscious refers to Kesser. Kesser divides into two, Arich and Atik. They interact with each other. You know, Pnimius Atik, Chitzenius Atik connects to Pnimius Arich. Arich is generally Rotzen, Atik is generally Tainug. They're both Makifim, Chaya and Yechida. And they both interact with each other. And the forehead can go both on Arich and sometimes on Atik. We talked about Chochmas Tema, 2 levels. There's Chochmas Tema that's concealed but can be revealed because it's relative to the revelation. Then there's Chochmas Tema, the Sosim Be'etzem. Be'etzem, it's completely super conscious. So there are levels in the super conscious levels. So suffice it to say that the Metzach is a higher level, more concealed, more connected to etzem, and that's why it's like a metzach. And tapuchin is more connected to gili, a little revelation from that level. And these are the 2 levels of Zman HaBayis and Zman HaGolus that he's saying here.
So tapuchin is Zman HaGolus,
this is the Yuchud Shlim and Yichud Leshem. Anyway, as I said, let's not be just like I learned it. I suggest go back if you're really interested. Just go back to I gave you the page number. I would go back and read it slowly. If you want, you can listen to the classes. We explained it at length. I just don't want to go learn that again right now. That's not what I think we should do.
No, he's saying
it's not going to help understanding this. Okay.
Tapuchin could be also Bisman HaGolus, right? That's what he said. What he said that is.
What do you mean could be? He just said that. He just said it explicitly. Ze yochel liyas gam Bisman HaGolus. That's the language of the Rebbe Rashab.
But only in the
Shamesh,
but only in the Shamesh Oidloi Nimshecho Me'olam. That's interesting.
Okay. Anyway, I just explained it. I don't know what to say. I just explained it.
Okay.
The Alter Rebbe was born in Zman HaGolus, right? So this would explain it.
Why not Neshama Shekvar Hoyu Bo'olam? Why cannot they be included in that from Tapuchim?
What are you asking?
Why Neshama Shekvar Hoyu Bo'olam cannot be included in this?
Who says they can't? He just said they are. That's the train Tapuchim.
No, he said that.
Let's read inside. So, but if
Nimshechu Me'olam, mashma that they are not.
No, Nimshechu Me'olam for sure that they're from a lower levels. It's the same idea. He's saying that from this level of Trein Tapuchin, which is a higher level, the lower levels don't even need Trein Tapuchin. Trein Tapuchin is a big gilui.
Right.
Eis Rotzen, he says. Times of Eis Rotzen.
Lo Nimshechu Me'olam are lower than Trein Tapuchin. That's what I'm asking.
No, Lo Nimshechu Me'olam are from Trein Tapuchin. That's
no,
what he said.
I mean Nimshechu Me'olam. Nimshechu Me'olam are lower than Trein Tapuchin.
Obviously, because they're lower than Shamas. They're not neshamas chadoshes. He wants to have neshamas chadoshes. He's talking about here.
But you have very great people that are not neshamas chadoshes.
So it's a nice question. What can I tell you? What should I tell you? I don't see the contradiction. So what's the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe? Is neshama chadosha? There were great people that were not neshamas chadoshes. Why don't you ask that question?
Okay.
How's the Alter Rebbe unique? More greater than other neshamas? They were great tzaddikim. So that's your question: is what is a neshama chadosha? Fine. I think go back also to that page where I talked about the different tzaddikim that he described that have this level of gilui. Anyway, remember, the theme in this mimer is not a thorough encyclopedic review of all tzaddikim and nu neshamas. The Rebbe Rashab is trying to explain something relevant to our discussion, chasanim and chasan, in the plural or singular, and trying to connect it to the time of Golus and time of Lasid Lovit, or Zman HaBayis. So basically, let's keep focused on that theme. And he's saying that there's these two levels of this Gili Ha'oris Panim. One is the Metzach, the forehead of Atik, and one is Trein Tapuchin, the cheeks. And one can be in Zman HaGolus, and one is not in Zman HaGolus, was Nifsak. In Zman HaGolus, the higher level was not paused or stopped flowing in that way. That's the key thing to remember. Ubezeh yesh leimer. And this we can say, the kasher hamshachi mepchines mitzcha da'atik. When the hamshach is coming from the forehead of Atik, oz hamshachi bizgalus mamish. Then the revelation is mamish revealed, literally revealed. V'lo yesh b'chizeh chiluki madreges klal. And there are no distinctions at all. Gam loy bizgalus. Also in the revealed level. You could say revealed level, maybe there's a thing. Also in this galus, it's a seamless flow from there through all the levels equally. The primary revelation of this will be in the future. Like I said before, here he says it explicitly. And a similar element of that, a similar taste of it, was in the time of the Beis, of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Holy Temple. Like he says in Mishnas Chassidim from Rabbi Amnul Chai Reiki, a great Makubal, cited in Chassidus, Mesechtes Zivug Abba Ve'ima. There he divides it by Mesechtes, by tractates. Mesechtes calls Zivug Abba Ve'ima, Pei Gimel, Mishnah Beis. That's how he structures it. The third chapter in the second section. Me'ein Zeh Bizman HaBayis, which is what he's been discussing here. Chasan Loshen Yachid. Shari behechel kodesh kadoshim, because in the chamber of the Holy of Holies, hoyagili ein sof mamish was literally the divine ein sof mamish, literally the mokama ein min amida, as I mentioned, that the space of the ark ein min amida was not measurable. It did not occupy space.
Bais Rishon. There was no awe in the Bais Sheni.
I mentioned that before. So which means when you measure the Aron in occupied space, when you measure the whole Kodesh Kadoshim, it's as if the Aron didn't exist. So it was there and not occupying space, which is ultimately a gili of the paradoxes that can only come from a level that's higher than Ishtalshlus altogether, higher than space and higher than beyond space. And delve into what we learned earlier, discussed earlier, the Maimer Padav Shalom. This was volume 2. In the bottom they quote, they say page 784. By contrast now, if the Amshach is from the two cheeks, it's also, Atzmus is also Nimshach. However, Raksheba bis almus. But it comes in a state of concealment. And therefore it has different levels. Now this, I want to refer you, he said almost the same language back when he began the topic. I just want to find it. Yeah, here we are. on page 1272, he said this language, that you could have a Gili Atzmi. He asked the question there, how we make differences between mitzvahs if all mitzvahs draw down Atzmus. So he said that he said this distinction that we're learning now, talking about the Metzach. Yeah. So from Plain Tapuchin, you do have distinction. So even though it's coming from a very high level, Atzmus, but it's now coming through some filters, and therefore there are distinct levels, and that's Chassanim in the plural. Okay. Now, if you want me to, we can stop here if you want to absorb all this, or he's going to tie it all together and go back to Havai Yechat Merivav and explain it all to finish the whole subject matter. It's your vote, whatever you guys decide. I can stop here or we can finish.
I vote to continue.
I agree. Let's finish it.
Okay. If we're already overwhelmed, might as well be totally overwhelmed, right?
Well, at least we can see where he winds it up.
Okay. So here's what he says now. V'zehu havai yechatu merivav. And this is that God, that the enemies, the opponents of God are abolished, eliminated, shattered. Yechatu. Shatamhu, the tam on the name Havaya, what do we call it? The cantonation? What was I keep forgetting the pronunciation of the word tam.
Cantillation.
Cantillation, sorry. What's cantonation? Maybe that's something else. Cantillation, okay.
A canton,
not that I know
is
okay,
a
tam means
canton is a
cantillation.
certain amount of land. It's like a segregation of land.
Oh. I thought it comes
Totally
from the word. Okay, fine. Fine. So the cantillation. So the tam on the Havaya of Yechatu is what? Hu b'gershayim. It's a gershayim, the two protruding, the two elevated apostrophes. Shem Beis Aliyas u Beis Yiridis. They indicate on two elevations and two descents, as we learned. Shenimsha mebchinas atzmus ein sof, that you get all the way from the highest level, atzmus ein sof, gam the b'chinas zah, also into zah. Uliyah shezeu amshachas ha'atzmus, and being that it's coming from atzmus, which is higher than the structure. L'chein yechatu merivav shem is batlim. That's why the opponents are shattered. They become nullified, eliminated. Da'agam shezeu bo b'yisalmus. Even though today it comes in a state of concealment, nevertheless, Atzmus is nimshach, and therefore Al-Kem is batlim kol ha'makatrigim. So even if we don't see this revelation, nevertheless, it still eliminates all the prosecutors and all the complainers and all those that challenge. Now, let me just stop here a second. Does he mean to say that we see the fact that there are mekatigim? I mean, we see, God forbid, until Mashiach comes, there are judgments that unfortunately take lives, and people die, and there are other things that happen that are not necessarily pleasant. So what is he saying? That even though it's concealed, we still eliminated the prosecutors? So why is the fact that in Zman Golus we see, even after Rosh Hashanah, not everybody's been judged favorably? So I'm not sure what he means by this line. Does he mean that we don't see it and it's still happening to some on the root level? Or he means, I'm not positive of what he means by this. I just wanted to point that out, because practically speaking, La'asad love, I understand. La'asad love will be completely eliminated. There'll be no opponents. But now we do see that there's still. So I want to reserve a conclusion about that until we either finish this or read more. Just wanted to point out if that's an obvious question that jumps out at us here. What you wanted to say something?
I said maybe he's saying when it happens, this is how it happens in a general concept, but it doesn't mean it happens every time.
No, that would not be the pshat. So what? So Rosh Hashanah we blow shofar and that it doesn't accomplish anything.
But for everybody, what if you're not davening for mechila? What if you're not part of it?
No. That's not the pshat here. The
No.
Tkiyah shofar is meant to. That's the whole point of Vayichat Meriva. He does. Where did you get here? He doesn't have any such indication. It's much easier to say that it does something. However, it's concealed and we don't see its impact. But I would not go that direction at all.
It might be that people
doesn't
that
accomplish what it has to accomplish.
it might be that only people that are able to go and look at the train tepuchim is this ability to cut off the mekatrim is when somebody looks at tepuchim, even though it's concealed. But what about that's people that are able to gaze at that level? But most people today aren't able to do that. So if everybody was able to look at even that lower level, not in the Metzach, but even train tepuchim, then probably we wouldn't cut off all the mekatrim.
So what are we saying? That all the years in Golus that they blew shofar, the biggest tzaddikim, including the Rebbe and all the Rabbeim, they were not able to achieve this level. So why is he saying that shofar accomplishes this? Fine, you could say simple people can. Even that I won't agree with because it's a mitzvah. Doesn't say anywhere because the deeper kavanah, that's how you mevatel mekah. He says his shofar reaches God, and even when a child cries out, God hears. But let's even put that aside. So to say that the fact of the matter is that for the thousands of over almost 2,000 years of Golus, no one ever blew shofar on that level. So then, what's the whole point of saying shofar comes to eliminate prosecution?
Maybe you could say
that's why I lean to say that it does accomplish. It may be concealed, meaning we don't get the hamshachi here below, but you did eliminate something in the root. That's more.
I think that's a better answer. I think that's a better answer, Rabbi. I think that's right.
That seems more likely.
Right.
Yeah.
That it actually is being accomplished. We just don't see it, but it is being accomplished. Those mekatrim l'mayla in spiritual terms are being wiped out by shofar and so on.
Yeah, that's most likely. I brought it up because he doesn't say explicitly. I think let's read on. Maybe something he'll say that'll indicate, but it's a very interesting discussion because, we could also always say the common answer that it could have been a lot worse, that it eliminated many of them, but not all of them. You could also make that argument. But
that's not an answer.
No, I think your first answer is right. That sounds to me that it is accomplished. We just don't see it.
That's most likely what he's saying here. Yeah. Okay.
So what is the accomplishment if we don't see it?
Well, you can't find an answer. What would you tell somebody? When someone davens and they say Tillim and the person that you daven for, God forbid, dies, was the tefillah l'shav? How do you answer that question?
It's not l'shav, but I don't know the explanation.
So first of all, tefillah always accomplishes something. It may not be the way we wanted it, and may not be revealed now, but it could be revealed later in different ways. That's one. The Shalosh says that every prayer opens up doors. However, you may need to open up another 50 doors. You only opened up 49, or 50, or 30, or 20. Finally, when the Rebbe
opening the doors, but the outside doors.
Let me finish. Yeah, 1 second. You don't know you, so let me answer. I'm answering the question. Finally, when shofar is blown by a id, especially by a tzaddik, but b'chlal, shofar blown properly, al pi halacha, it says that it's kirei gzar din. It says it, and we say in tefillin, tzana tekef, that we abolish the bad decrees. So you have to say that it does something. Sometimes in the root, it says in Chassidus, Kuntus Semayin explains it at length, that you pray for something and the hamshach is there, but there could be a block that doesn't let it come down to this world. But you've eliminated, just like you've cut off the head of the serpent, but the poison is still here in this world. So you can eliminate sherish aklipus, you can eliminate the sherish of these gvuras, kashas, and so on, and still, because it's Golus, it's still concealed, so we don't see it, but you have eliminated a real power of the negative. And the Asadavi will all be revealed. Just like when we do a mitzvah, we don't always see, we usually don't see the revelation, but it's stored in a kufsa. The same thing you can say in the negative. The fact of the matter is, you could say the fact that Jews today live in freedom, we can daven, learn, send our children to schools without any gzeiros. And this has been the case for 100 years almost, a little less, and never unprecedented. Where did that come from? That didn't happen by accident. That happened because year after year, the shofar was blown, mekatrigim were eliminated, until finally it started having an impact. Now, are there still anti-Semites? Are there still prosecuting angels? There are, but it's nothing close to what it was once. So you could explain it that way, that it's accumulative and so on. So many ways to explain it. That is not really, we can get back to it. So there's no question that it accomplishes. And he says clearly it's Beisalmus. And then let me continue. Let me finish till the end of the paragraph. Like it is in Torah. The divrei Torah ain't a makablin tuma. It says words of Torah do not absorb. They don't retain tuma. Like for example, when a person, let's say, touches something that's impure, the person becomes impure. Divrei Torah do not absorb. They can't become impure. Another Maimer Chazal, the Talmid Chacham, ein eshel Gehenim sheletus behem. Talmid Chachamim, the fire of Gehenim does not control them, does not prevail over them. They're immune to the fire of Gehenim. You'll say, well, what are they doing in Gehenim? It's another discussion. But even if they ended up in Gehenim because of some sins, but since they have Torah, the Torah is like wraps them around and protects them from the fire. That's what it says. Hagam shezeu ha-Torah k'mei sheba lamata, and though this is the Torah as it comes below. We're not talking about Torah in Gan Eden. B'chinas islapshus, and the state of islapshus, in other words, you're learning Torah, and nevertheless, they don't accept Tumah. They don't retain Tumah. I know you could say, what about the Gemara that says, Nasa Samovis, if a person learns Torah Shalei L'Shma the wrong way, it can become Samovis, like death, poison, deathly poison. But that's not a contradiction, because that means that's because the person is affected by it. But the Torah never makabel Tumah. The Mefarshim explained that. So the point that he's saying here is that even though it's below, the Torah in some way retains and remains immune to negative forces, to impurity. Same thing in our case here, through the drawing down of atzmus that comes through Havaya Yechata Meriv. Hagam shazel bis almus, even though it's concealed, nevertheless the opponents and the enemies are eliminated. And the primary elimination, the primary nullification or annihilation of them will be in the future. And that's why it says Yechatu, not the Lashon Asid. It will be Yechatu. Yet today too, we also have this element. The Eid Ein Sof, through drawing down the core of Eid Ein Sof, like every Rosh Hashanah, where the core of the Eid Ein Sof is drawn down, through the sounding of the shofar, you draw down from Atzmus Eid Ein Sof in Zol, Commission is Bar Le'il, Mizbatlim Kol Hadinim V'Akitregim. So every Rosh Hashanah, you eliminate all the judgments and the Kitregim and the complaints or the prosecutions and Chulu. Yeah. You have to say that's the pshat for sure that we discussed. Okay, let's stop here, but any comments, questions? Let's see what what everybody has to say.
You could see in the time of Shlomo HaMelech, Bizman Beis, he was ruling all over the world. There was no Gashmizdike problems. There was money. There was Ishtachas Gamne, Ishtachas Ninosing, Begashmiz. So he said, "Me ain't zeh hoya Bizman Beis."
Yeah, that's correct. It's just, yeah.
There was no Almus.
Well, Mokamor Neina Minamid is the real proof that he brings here. That's clear.
Yeah.
But it was temporary. It was temporary. It was temporary.
Yeah. What does he add here at the end? He did summarize. Here we have these two Elias, and here we have these two Yeridas. And yes, I understand it's going up to get Atzmus or Ein Sof. and then you're bringing it down or chadash. I get it, but then he just concludes, what is he adding by just saying?
Doesn't have to add anything. He's helping us sum up. It's like a process of explaining an idea. He's tying it up. If he didn't say this, he wants to bring it together, even if he doesn't add anything.
Okay.
I mean, he added a few things about divrei Torah and makabel tuma.
Yeah.
He mentioned a few things, and also that the ikar will be la'ased, and now we have some of it that he didn't mention earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there are things he didn't mention, but it's really mostly wrapping it up.
Yeah.
But adding some details. Listen, there's more to come. There's plenty more to come.
There is more to understand. In the time of this Ayin Beis, we see that they did a result and they did all kind of these things. It was such a gilui from Mitzvah, the Attic. How is it possible?
That's why you have to talk about Mokim Ha'aron Eina Min Amida. He doesn't bring. You're trying to bring. He doesn't say the world was like the future. He doesn't say anywhere that. He says there was a me'ain in the Beis Hamikdash in Kedesh Kadosh in Mokim Ha'aron Eina Min Amida. That's what he's bringing. That's the gili. And takanat like Lasud Lavi. I explained that before. And at the end of the day, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Remember, so clearly it was not a permanent gili lamata, so it didn't have that full effect. But there was a taste of it, just like by Matan Torah, it was me'einzeh. Remember, this is not black and white. These are giluyim that you have. That's why I referred you back to that page with the tzaddikim. Different people had a taste of Elam Haba, like you say, hitimon me'ein Elam Haba. What does that mean? What does it mean that Shabbos is a taste of Elam Haba? You say, what do you mean? Shabbos is Golus? There are people killed on Shabbos, wars, death. How could you say Shabbos is a taste of Elam Haba? How do you answer that question? The answer is it's a taste. There are elements of it. That doesn't mean it's the Geula Amitis Vashleim. And the same thing with many things. When you say something has a taste of something, something is a similar, it's like an appetizer or a piece of it, a glimpse or a glimmer of it. And then it's the full-blown experience, Lasud Lavi. In general, all of Chassidus can only be understood that way. And even Lasud Lavi, there are going to be stages. It's not all one stage. It's many stages, Lasud Lavi too. But generally speaking, just to sum up what he began with, so now we understand what it means by Ata Amadata. He said before, Amida is a seamless flow from the highest to the lowest. He said that's in special times, Mana Beis and Lasud Lavi. But generally speaking, there are two levels at least, and levels that are train tapuchin, like he said, and that's why it's train tapuchin. Metzach is only one, and the cheeks are two. He doesn't say that explicitly, but it seems like it's very similar to chassan in the singular and chassanim in the plural. So, and so therefore, it all depends. Like he says that the chassanim, when chassan lashon yachid is in the singular, so it's one hamshacha from the highest to the lowest, all the way into zah, and then there's a level that is in zman hagolus where you have from tein tapuchin. So it also comes down, but it's in a concealed state, and therefore it's in stages. Two chassanim, two levels. Okay, so there could be a state where you don't have a Gilead Etzem altogether. Let's talk about not Rosh Hashanah, or you're not doing any Avodah. So then we're subject to the rules of Seder Shtalshlus. Here he's giving us ways to transcend Seder Shtalshlus, but there's two levels of doing so. One is as a more Golus way of doing it, and one is as Mana Beis or the Lasud Lavi way of doing it. Just want to add that into the equation. Okay. So with this, we conclude the